Welcome to the 700 Club, and thank you so much for joining with us. Today we're going to go to Israel again. A terrified mother, her two babies, they were wrapped in a sheet and forced into a car by Hamas on October 7th. Israeli Defense Forces are releasing the video of this brutality found in Khan Yunis.
The release comes as the International Court of Justice is hearing arguments challenging Israel's right to live in the biblical heartland. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl reports.
The Israel Defense Forces say they found the video in Khan Yunis. The IDF says it shows Shiri Bibas and her two children, 4-year-old Ariel and 9-month-old Kfir, taken captive on October 7th, terrorists wrapping them in a sheet and forcing them into a car.
Those who have the audacity to question our need to operate in Gaza, but don't have the decency, the basic decency and humanity, to demand that Hamas release our hostages first of all. They all should take a good look at this terrified mother, Shiri, clutching her babies.
Kfir has since turned 1-year-old while in captivity. Meanwhile, in The Hague, the International Court of Justice is hearing arguments over Israel's so-called occupation of Palestinian-claimed territory. Lawyer for the Palestinians, Paul Riker, says it's all about a Palestinian state.
The best and possibly the last hope for the two-state solution that is so vital to the needs of both peoples is for the court to declare illegal the main obstacle to that solution, the ongoing Israeli occupation of Palestine.
Attorney Andrew Tucker represents Fiji, one of the few nations speaking out for Israel.
Palestinians argue that Israel is illegitimate and that the Palestinians are the true indigenous people of Palestine, and they must have, at the very least, a state in all of the so-called occupied territories. That includes the old city of Jerusalem, the whole of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, the Gaza Strip.
He says the hearing is an illegitimate process intended to undermine the sovereignty of a UN member state.
Fiji is basically arguing the court has no business in this conflict. This is a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
Tucker says in a worst-case scenario, the court declares Israel an illegal occupier.
The very existence of Israel and the territories, militarily, administratively, but also the settlements are all illegal. Therefore, Israel should withdraw all of that out of the territories. And that will be used in all kinds of political processes to boycott Israel, to isolate Israel.
Meanwhile, in the UN Security Council, the U.S. vetoed a resolution for a ceasefire, but is circulating another proposal calling for a temporary ceasefire linked to the release of all hostages and humanitarian aid to Gaza. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you are concerned about the citizens in Gaza, the civilians, and who wouldn't be concerned, put the pressure on Hamas. They're the bad actor here. They're the ones that committed all of the atrocities on October 7th. Until they unconditionally surrender, until they release all the hostages, until they lay down their weapons and say, we will not do this ever again. Until that happens, the civilians of Gaza are at risk. And they're at risk because of Hamas. For this international court to take up the issue of whether or not Israel is a legitimate state is absolutely incredible to me. It's well settled under international law that Israel has a right to exist. That was one of the declarations following World War I, and the reason there was a British mandate, that mandate was to create two states. It was the Palestinians who refused that. Israel took up the offer, and in 1948, the UN recognized Israel. What did the Arabs do? What did the Palestinians do? They declared war. They lost that war. They've lost every single war they've ever waged against Israel. and to say somehow or other they're longing for peace and all of this. No, they're not. When they say from the river to the sea, what they're asking for is for Israel to be wiped out. Now they're trying to do it in an international court that certainly has no jurisdiction over this kind of claim. If you want more information about the history of the modern state of Israel, we have it for you. It's called Whose Land Is It? And it goes through the claims of the Palestinians and the claims of the Jews. The Jews have the historic claim, and Jews have been in Israel for 4,000 years. And to say anything different is not accurate. It's not part of history or archaeology. If you want that, it's for a gift of any dollar amount. Call us 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/whoseland. In other news, as Russia intensifies attacks on Ukraine, President Biden is pushing House Republicans to approve a foreign aid package. Ephraim Graham has that story and more from our CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, the president says House Republicans are making a big mistake holding up foreign aid. Speaker Mike Johnson vows not to pass any bill that does not include protections for the U.S. southern border. This comes as Russian forces took a city in the east, with Ukrainian forces reportedly running low on ammunition and weapons. Meanwhile, President Biden is condemning Russian President Vladimir Putin for the mysterious death of his main political rival, Alexei Navalny. Former President Donald Trump is also weighing in on social media, posting Navalny's death reminds him of, quote, rigged elections and grossly unfair courtroom decisions in America, likely referencing his take on the 2020 presidential election and his own legal battles. Joe Biden and Donald Trump will likely square off in 2024's presidential election, with Biden at 81 years old and Trump at 77. Both face the challenge of connecting with younger voters. CBN's Matt Galka went to one of the country's oldest political conventions to get the Gen Z perspective.
In 2020, exit polling had Joe Biden dominating the youth vote over former President Donald Trump. 4 years later, poll numbers for young voters show a lack of enthusiasm as we head into the presidential election.
Trump or Biden?
Are you kidding? Biden.
The president is on TikTok, the controversial app dominated by Gen Z. It's the latest attempt to court young voters in a consequential election year.
The 2024 MockCon convention will now come to order.
For 116 years, the students at Washington and Lee University in Virginia have been putting on MockCon. The student-run mock convention sets out to mimic the real thing for whichever party is out of power. To put it bluntly, they are the very votes politicians are so desperately trying to tap into. MockCon has accurately predicted party nominees over 70% of the time, and the age group has the opportunity to help decide the next commander-in-chief. For junior Tommy Holstead, the choice is clear.
And that is Donald Trump, and he definitely has my support, and he should have the entire country's.
Holstead says there's no secret issue out there to win him over. For the Texas-born student, it's the border.
And it's a policy that actually directly impacts me and my state and everything that I guess goes along with that. And I think that his strong stance on the border is really what sets him apart from like a lot of the other candidates that are in the race.
Henry Hayden runs the university's College Republicans chapter. He says younger voters value having their voices heard.
Free speech, I think that's a very important thing. As some of the speakers highlighted, cancel culture. Really, I think our generation is not too enthusiastic about that.
Some polls predict that less young people could vote this election cycle than they did 4 years ago. And one of the reasons why could be because it's hard to relate to a much older candidate. And for some young Democrats at MockCon, there was a strong desire to end the divisiveness they see in Trump's MAGA movement.
The polarization in the government, I feel like it's extremely harmful to our government, and I feel like Republican and Democrat shouldn't be as, I guess, at odds as they are right now.
A mock convention of the Republican Party has nominated Donald John Trump.
Now it's up to the candidates to figure out if they can get the future of the country on their side. Matt Galka, CBN News.
Maintaining America's global superpower status is a major issue in 2024. Many consider China the greatest foreign threat. But Beijing's rulers are facing internal problems no one is talking about. Dale Hurd explains why some are calling 2023 the Great Fall of China and how 2024 could be worse.
The Chinese call it a tofu dreg project, or buildings made out of tofu. It means a badly constructed building or shoddy workmanship, and there are examples of it all over social media. Tofu dreg projects could also be a symbol of China today. It might look impressive on the outside, but underneath, it's falling apart. Experts told us that this would be the Chinese century. However, Xi Jinping's China dream is dying, thanks to a series of setbacks on almost every front.
2023 was a bad year for the Chinese government in just about every way, and 2024 does not promise to be much better.
Last year was China's worst economically since 1976. A study that the government tried to suppress found that almost 1 billion Chinese may be living in poverty.
There are a lot of things that are going wrong that are fixable, but fundamentally there are more things going wrong that aren't fixable.
Josh Birnbaum at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy says international businesses and capital are continuing to flee China because staying has become too risky.
Companies are increasingly seeing the writing on the wall in China. The environment is no longer conducive to open business. Going from $100 billion in foreign direct investment to negative $11 billion over the last 7 quarters is just remarkable.
Youth unemployment is so high the government has stopped reporting it. Increasing numbers of youth have given up on the future and are lying flat, which means to be unemployed and unmarried, basically dropping out. China expert Gordon Chang.
China is right now in a state of turmoil. There's a sense of gloom which has pervaded Chinese society. People are saying, this society no longer is what I want to live in.
China's demographics are in free fall. Last year, for the first time since the 1960s, more Chinese died than were born. By 2040, China is expected to have more elderly than the entire U.S. population, 400 million.
You're having a revolution among young women who are turning their backs on society. And so they're saying, look, I'm not getting married. I'm not having kids. I'm just opting out.
China's stock markets lost more than $6 trillion in value in 3 years. China's construction and real estate sector is continuing to crater. On the foreign policy front, China's attempt to intimidate Taiwan before the recent presidential election backfired. Beijing had ramped up incursions into Taiwan's airspace and even launched a missile with a satellite toward Taiwan right before Election Day. The Taiwanese people responded by electing a new president firmly opposed to reunification with the mainland.
And this means that Taiwan is moving away from China.
Purges in the party leadership and the military suggest Xi fears opposition. Chang believes Xi's only way out is to win a big war. Birnbaum says without a massive political pivot, China faces a grim future.
I would think that in the short term, in the next 2 to 4 years, they will muddle, and after that, they will implode.
Kind of like pieces of Chinese building materials. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Eye-opening report. Gordon?
It is an eye-opening report. I've said for decades, China hasn't had its revolution yet. And when will that happen? When you look at their history, their revolutions have not ever been peaceful, and it's led to incredible turmoil. There was great promise, though. You go back to June 4th, 1989. Students led a protest. It was put down with extraordinary violence, and they call it a massacre as to what happened. It was an opportunity for them to open up and not have these restrictive policies. The current government is in the middle of a purge, not of outsiders, but of inside the Communist Party. And what's going to be left after all of that? History has shown us again and again, this kind of authoritarian, centralized rule never works in the long run. You always need to have people having the sense that they can govern themselves, that their vote matters and that they can actually approach their elected officials and have a redress of grievances. That needs to be core to every modern civilization. I'm waiting for China to wake up to it. So far they haven't, and I fear the end will be a very violent revolution.